Hi, and welcome to Joe Talks Movies and Science Fiction Saturday once more. We've got two old movies for you, one from 1958, one from 1977. One's American, one's Italian. Both have American stars in them. One is a giant monster movie, and the other one is an apocalyptic biblical prophecy thing involving a thermonuclear power plant. Not too many movies like that. So let's get started with, I'll do the thermonuclear power plant first because it sounded cooler than the other one did. 1977 is the year Star Wars came out, and there was a lot of weird stuff coming out at that time. And this one's weirder than most. It's got some truly WTF stuff in it. It's a little film directed by Alberto Di Martino called Holocaust 2000. It's a messed up movie. It's messed up in a number of different ways. It stars Kirk Douglas as an industrialist Robert Kane, Agostina Belli as Sarah, the woman he falls in love with as the movie progresses. And the actress is actually 30 years younger than Kirk Douglas, so you got that age gap thing. I can't really talk. I'm 17 years older than my wife. But it particularly sticks out in this movie. Simon Waters, Robert's son, Angel. And it has some interesting character actors in it as well. You got Anthony Quayle playing a physicist. You got Virginia McKenna playing Robert's wife. And you also have Alexander Knox playing another scientist who comes to an unusual death in the film. The movie also has a particularly strident Ennio Morricone soundtrack. Not his best work by any means, but odd and creepy and dissonant, which is probably what the movie calls for. In the story, Kane is developing a thermonuclear power plant. They're doing a first proof of concept reactor in the desert of a third world country. They actually filmed it in Morocco. And it says that Robert meets Sarah, and she takes him down into a cave and shows him a carving that says Jesus in 4th century AD script. Doesn't have the J in it, it has an I instead. And that carving and that cave are part of a biblical prophecy about the end of the world, the apocalypse, revelations, all of that stuff, where a 7-headed monster is going to attack the earth and destroy humanity, blah, blah, blah. Not too many people take this seriously at the start of the film. There are a whole bunch of eco-protesters around, and Robert's holding a dinner party with all of the stakeholders in his plans for this thermonuclear power plant. One of the protesters sneaks in and attacks him with a knife, but as the knife is being taken off the guy, it stabs Robert's wife in the stomach, the woman played by Virginia McKenna, and she dies. Nobody seems particularly racked about this. There are deaths in both of these movies where nobody particularly gives a shit about the person who died and seem to bounce back with a horrible alacrity. So as the scientists and Angels start developing the software and the computer gear for this thermonuclear power plant, which has 7 big reactors in it, Robert starts getting the idea from the scientists as well that things aren't going well. The numbers of the calculations are just not right. They seem to be producing a lot more power than the reactors can hold. It's a very dangerous thing. And Robert also gets in touch with a priest who warns him about the apocalypse and all this kind of stuff. And he starts believing that his family is in some way going to be responsible for the Antichrist. Him and Sarah fall in love, and you get some mildly soft-core scenes of a naked Kirk Douglas with a naked Agostina Belli being horizontally friendly to one another. A bit off-putting, but not as off-putting as the scene later, where Robert is having a nightmare, where he's running naked along a kind of a salt flat. And you do get moments of full frontal nude Kirk Douglas at the age of 60 in this film. It's in good nick for a 60-year-old, but he ain't the prettiest guy in the world from the neck down. So there are all these conspiracies, there are all these calculations that are going wrong. There are all these people who are against this nuclear project who suddenly and mysteriously die. The leader of the country where they're planning to do the plant changes, and the new leader is walking across the tarmac when a wind gust catches a rotor from a helicopter, which chops the top of his head off. Purely by accident, of course. No supernatural stuff, of course, but it actually is. And it's kind of weird. Nice bit of special effects work where the top of the guy's head gets cut off. So all props to the special effects guys for that. It's a nice little chop in the top of the head off scene. So Sarah gets pregnant with a baby, and Robert is disturbed because he thinks the baby is going to be the Antichrist. And so he starts gaslighting her. He tries to talk her into getting an abortion because, he's an old guy. He doesn't necessarily want a child, blah, blah, blah. But what he's actually thinking is, I don't want my baby to grow up to be the Antichrist. Here's a spoiler for you. It's actually son Angel who's the Antichrist, because the son Angel is actually the second-born child, because at birth there were twins, and Angel's umbilical cord choked his brother to death in the womb. Weird stuff. There's a weird kind of confluence here between gynecological stuff and biblical apocalypse style theology. It's just totally mad and very Italian. So he tries to convince her to have this abortion. Then he tells her they're going to Harley Street to get a checkup with a doctor. But the doctor's actually an abortionist, and she runs away and hides. And she's being hidden by Angel, who gets her to a clinic and the baby is born. But Robert still thinks that the baby is going to be the Antichrist because he can't figure out what's actually going on. Some really nasty kind of blokey misogyny in this film in so many ways. And the bits where Robert's trying to convince his wife to abort her child and then tries to con her into aborting her child are really creepy. At that stage of the movie, I just didn't give a shit what happened to this guy because he was a total asshole. And I didn't like him at all. And to be honest with you, he had a fairly small dick. So here's where it goes even weirder. Scientists start dying and disappearing. There's a scene with Alexander Knox's character. He has a meeting. He wants to be a secluded place where they can't be overheard. So they go on this sand causeway between two islands in England, and they start having a conversation about the apocalypse and how these calculations are wrong, and you've got to stop the nuclear power plant, blah, blah, blah. And the tide comes in really suddenly and drowns the guy, but Kirk Douglas's character survives. A tidal bore basically takes him out unexpectedly, which is really weird, but also kind of cool. But here's the problem. There's two endings to this movie. There's the American ending that they filmed for the American audience in a cut-down, shorter version of the film. In the American version, again, spoilers, Robert walks into a conference of the people who are running the consortium to build the power plant, including his son, and he's got a whole bunch of dynamite wired to his chest. He blows it up and saves the world from the apocalypse. In the longer version, which is the version I saw this time around, Robert goes into hiding. There's an airplane crash and his son thinks that he's on there and he's died. But he goes into hiding with his wife and their newborn child somewhere in a desert and wait for the apocalypse. This movie is mad. I remember seeing it back in the day when it was out in cinemas here in Australia. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that the American ending with the dynamite and the kaboom is the one that we saw. Both endings are pretty shitty. And both endings are, how do we end this film kind of endings. Italian horror movies in the 1970s are wild. They just went mad in the same way in the 1970s. They went mad with crime movies. The directors had money and the directors were very, very good at what they did, and they were very good at putting things together on a budget. And so you get a whole bunch of, in various genres, mad Italian movies in the 1970s. In the 60s, they had it as well. Went back when they were doing sword and sandal movies, and they did spy movies for a while. Then they moved over to horror and crime movies. And Alberto De Martino's Holocaust 2000 is deeply mad. It's crazy. It mixes theology with science fiction, the science fiction of the computer giving biblical prophecies, and the science fiction of this thermonuclear power plant that they're building. All of that gets blended in with this apocalyptic thing. It came out roughly the same time as The Omen and after The Exorcist. So there's a lot of Antichrist demon shit in the zeitgeist at the time. You might want to check this one out. Get the longer version if you can, because it gives you a little more meat on the bone. And the old school American/Australian ending is pretty obvious and pretty mad, but in a lesser way. Whereas, waiting for the apocalypse with your wife and child in a really nice little villa in the desert has more oomph in some ways. So you might want to check that one out. It's available. It's got a Blu-ray release for some reason. And it's just crazy enough to be interesting. Second movie I got for you is Earth vs. the Spider from 1958. Directed by Bert I. Gordon. It was an AIP movie that Nicholson and Arkoff produced. Low budget, kind of interesting. Special effects were actually done by Bert I. Gordon, which shows you how low the budget is. You get the director to do the special effects. There's something going low in a movie. Standard 1950s drive-in fodder. It was filmed partly, it says, in the Carlsbad Caverns. But what I suspect actually happened based on what we've got is they took photo stills of Carlsbad Caverns and use them as foreground elements in the movie. So you've got what I suspect is a sheet of glass. Pasted on it, you've got the stalactites and stalagmites of Carlsbad Caverns with a hole cut in the middle of it so that you can film through it the live action actors in your scenes. There's a lot of scenes that look like that in this movie. I could be wrong about the way they did it, but it looks like that. Right at the start, you've got a kind of gory beginning where there's a truck driver driving down a country road at night in a pickup, and suddenly something slashes across his windshield and there's a splatter of blood across his face. And we find out later that it's crashed and that the thing that was stretched across the road is a very, very large spider web. So you then cut to the usual 20-year-old high school seniors, a couple called Mike and Carol, who are dating. And Carol's worried because her dad hasn't come home last night. And Mike's, to be honest with you, a bit of an arsehole. The dialogue in this, for some reason, shows him not really caring what happens about her father, going, yeah, well, he's done this before, it'll be all right, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't have any emotional intelligence at all. There's usually a lot more in these couples, but the couple in this case have absolutely no chemistry. And it's not because the actors aren't trying to do their job. It's because the dialogue portrays the male character as an asshole who disregards everything that the woman says to him. I blame the writer. So Mike and Carol go looking for her father and find the pickup truck, but they don't find him. And there's a cave nearby, so their father might be injured and he's taking shelter in the cave. They get to the entrance of the cave and Mike finds her father's hat torn to pieces and then hides it from Carol and just like chucks it away because Mike is an asshole. They go into the cave and they're stumbling around. And apparently there is luminescent algae on the walls so they can see. They don't have to figure around with flashlights in the movie that way. And so they fall down a little bit of a cliff and onto an enormous spider web. And they find out there's a giant spider in this cave. No explanation is ever given for this apart from the fact that something's going wrong that's creating giant spiders. That's as far as the movie takes it. It's not particularly interested in the origin story of the spider. So they go back to school and this science teacher, played by Ed Kemmer, believes them after they show him a chunk of the spider web, and he gets the town sheriff, who's skeptical, of course, and is kind of creepy. The guy playing him plays him like a creep. Male creepiness is a theme in this movie. And so they decide to get a truckload of DDT, pesticide, and they take out the spider, and then they grab the spider and take it back to town and put it in the school gymnasium until some scientists can come and take it away and examine it and all that kind of thing. So you've got in the gymnasium, up the other end of the room, a giant spider. And in the first end of the room, a bunch of teenagers are rehearsing a rock and roll band for the school dance. The rock and roll music resurrects the spider, who wakes up and goes berserk and kills the janitor, because janitors are always expendable in this kind of a movie, and runs rampant through the town, kills a bunch of people, tips over some cars, and heads out into the countryside once more and back to the cave. There's one weird moment in this movie too, where as people are wandering through the town after the spider's been rampaged, there's a blood-spattered baby crying on the footpath. And that's just in there for a moment, and they just cut away from that and nothing's ever said about it. But it is quite a disturbing moment in the film. The other funny thing I found in this film is when the police chief takes cover from the spider as it's rampaging through the streets, for a moment he hides inside the Gay Mattress Company. There's a factory in town called the Gay Mattress Company. I think it should be a mattress company today. I think it would sell a lot of mattresses to have a company called the Gay Mattress Company today. In this movie, you've got the Gay Mattress Company. So Carol and Mike go back to the cave to find a necklace that she's dropped in there. It was a gift from her father that he never got the chance to give to her, and she's lost it somewhere in the cave. So they go back into the cave. Meanwhile, the authorities blow up the entrance to the cave, not knowing the kids are in there, and they're trapped in the cave with the spider. The high school teacher has this weird idea that what they can do is they can hook a whole bunch of cables up to the power lines nearby, drill a hole down into the cave, rescue the kids. They find out the kids are in there eventually. Rescue the kids and electrocute the spider to death. which is what they ultimately do. This is a mad 1950s drive-in movie. And I kind of like it. The special effects of the giant spider are serviceable. They're not great, but I suppose they were intended first for drive-in movies and then for old school cathode ray TVs. So high definition wasn't particularly a priority for them. And there are some moments where the spider overlaps things, or it's behind things that shouldn't be behind, and all sorts of things like that with its legs. But in general, the giant spider effects work. And the movie tries to do a lot with a little. If I was going to give them a mulligan and get them to redo the movie in 1958, here's what I suggest. A few more character beats for the main characters. Give them a little more agency. Give them a little more of who they are. It's not going to take up too much runtime to do that. But Carol and Mike are just so poorly written as characters. It made me cringe. The school teacher, played by Ed Kemmer, is serviceable. The police chief, there are notes you could give him on that too, because he plays it skeptical and jovial, and he chuckles at things he shouldn't chuckle at. And he doesn't inspire confidence at all as a character, particularly a character who's supposed to be an authority. There are a couple of jump scares. There's a bit where they bring a guy into the police station who's died and been killed by the spider and had the juice sucked out of him. And the dummy they have for that's pretty effective. But in general, the other thing too, I forgot the other thing. One of the school kids, the one who is the band leader of the rock and roll band, is 35 years old. The actor's actually 35 years old, where he's playing a high school senior. And he looks 35 years old. So you go, okay, did this guy repeat the high school for 10, 15, 20 years? Or what? It's a very odd thing, but it's kind of makes the movie more fun in its own way as well. 35-year-old high school students are something somebody should write a paper on, because there are a lot of them around and they're never not funny. To be honest with you, as a giant spider movie, I think this one lands at least as well as Tarantula. Even though it's much lower budget, it wasn't made by a big studio. And even though it doesn't have Clint Eastwood napalming the spider at the end of it, it holds up against that. I think it's about on par with it. You know, the level of production is lower, but the enjoyment's there, and the giant spider works just as well. So you might want to check out Earth vs. the Spider. Apparently it was remade in 2001. I haven't seen that version of it, but I suspect it's not very good. Let me know if you've seen the 2001 version of Earth vs. the Spider. By the way, it is versus. Contrary to what people who were born in the 21st century will see you, VERSUS is pronounced versus, not verse. One of my bugbears. So that's what I got for you this time around. A mad Italian apocalyptic science fiction movie from 1977. And a rock standard Burt I. Gordon drive-in monster movie from 1958. They don't particularly work as a double feature, but I watched them both, so I'm talking about them on the channel. Nonetheless, they're a bit of fun. They're entertaining. They're each mad in their own way. And they're both movies, which is an increasing delight of mine when I watch cinema these days. The movies you can pick apart and suggest how they could be better. And you can have that discussion with people you watch the movies with or by yourself. But either way, you can autopsy these movies and find out what made them die. And that is part of the fun for me these days with this kind of film. Thanks a lot for watching. Usual things, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member, by donating through YouTube, or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got 3 Shaw Brothers wuxia movies made in the 1960s and 1970s in Hong Kong. And they're at least as mad as these 2 movies are. And Imprint just put them out, and they're a lot of fun to watch. Also, I forgot to mention, on the other channel, I've got a video telling you how Liam Neeson messed up one of my previous videos on the travel channel. So you might want to watch that one. I'll put a link to it at the end of this video. So until all that exciting stuff happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some old drive-in movies and some mad 1970s Italian genre films. And I'll catch you next time.